and available to support.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. Assemblymember Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you both for all you're doing to help Californians in need during this crisis. One tool I think that could be added to your toolbox, maybe you can talk about this a little bit. You have the ability to, in these crisis situations, to rely on the National Guard. Has that been a consideration? They have resources. They come in and build small communities. They have shower services, water buffaloes, et cetera. Has there been any need, or is it too early, or have you relied on the National Guard at all?
We have not. I think it's too early at this point to go that direction. We've been able to get shower facilities set up in East Porterville, set up community tanks. The nonprofits that are working with Tulare County are in the process of staffing up so that we can install more tanks. And we want to get to about 50 tanks a week installed throughout the county. And folks locally believe that they can get there. And as the ones that are paying for this program, we continue to, I don't want to say micromanage, but we're on the ground and we're actively involved on a weekly basis of tracking those activities. So we've still got other resources at the state level that we can pursue as well. There's a possibility of using Conservation Corps members to go down there and with some basic training be able to provide some support. But the way our system works is we don't activate any type of state or federal asset until we've exhausted all of the resources locally. And there's still additional resources locally that can be utilized and that the county's working on ramping up. So, but that's a question we continue to ask as to whether or not we need to mobilize additional resources. And when the time comes that we need to do that, we certainly have the systems in place to be able to do that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Assemblymember Frazier.
Now that we've addressed what you've accomplished with the water need, in the emergency declaration also we had in the allocation from the legislature, we had something to do with food. And also, are you directly responsible for getting food to the individuals that have been impacted by the drought also through an emergency process?
We're not directly involved. The Department of Social Services is coordinating the delivery of food to the local food banks, and that program's been very successful. And I think Charles.
Yeah, I mean, we're not directly in charge of that program. It's the California Department of Social Services that provide the funding and the resources. But we communicate with them all the time. We hold the conference call on a weekly basis with them. They report back to us any needed resources, any development, any new needs. We work very closely with that department.
That might be something that our second panel could probably answer.
And I just wanted to know if they were tracking it.
Absolutely. For example, we provided, in Kern County, we provided around 140,000 boxes of food that have been distributed. In Tulare, we have provided 133 boxes, Fresno 112,000, San Joaquin 45,000, and Stanislaus 34,000, Monterey 23,000. So Department of Social Services has been on top of that and been working very actively and diligently on providing food to the needed families.
Through our State Operations Center, we have a system in place not only for advanced planning, looking at issues that we need to be looking at 30, 60, 120 days out, but also bringing together all the various state agencies on a weekly basis to hold them accountable to the items in the executive order and kind of find out what their progress is and track that.
Perfect. Good to know.
Got it. Now, I know we've continued kind of come back to Tulare County as kind of the epicenter, but you also mentioned Monterey, Tuolumne. Thank you. Some of the other counties as well. But, let me just ask specifically, what's the plan for these other communities or cities that are looking to run out of water later this fall? Like I said, I keep going back to all those news articles that I read where you had the top 10 cities throughout the state of California that are looking at potentially running out of water. And I know we're focusing on the immediate, which we should do for those communities and families that need it now. But what are we doing for that short term that we know can be potential problems in just a few weeks from now or a month and a half from now?
So the State Water Board's Division of Drinking Water is responsible for monitoring and addressing issues with our larger systems which gets to what you're referring to, Chair, and that is those systems. They look at those systems that are on a 30, 60, 120 days from potentially running out of water. We're involved as well. There are within my region right now, 2 different systems that we're looking at that need to do some immediate infrastructure work to deal with some potential shortages. So we track that and help coordinate that. The primary responsibility for monitoring those situations falls with the State Water Board's Division of Drinking Water. And so they're the ones that are keeping an eye on that. And as funds need to be distributed to address particular issues, they're focused on that.
And so,
Also, sorry.
Go ahead.
Also, the 3 regions, they track all the drought task force, local drought task force, and they attend those regularly to get feedback from them and any needed resources. So that's how we keep an eye on these type of situations.
got it. And so what does that list look like right now for communities that are within that 120-day window? Do we have a lot of cities and communities that fall under that you're working with DWR now on, or?
That we could get that information for you from the State Water Board's Division of Drinking Water. I know they've got a list online of all of the systems that they're funding, new projects, emergency projects, and so they track that and provide that out to the public. But we can follow up and get that information for you.
Thank you. Just one more quick question, and then we'll move on to panel 2. Assemblymember Mathis.
So I want to just go back real quick. You talked about the process of bringing nonprofits under the umbrella, helping them out, providing funding for staffing them. If you can enlighten the panel a little bit more on that process and how those nonprofits can come under the umbrella and be useful to helping out everybody in need. And then the other part that I wanted to touch base on is you talked about capital projects, and I know at our water summit, part of the planning process was doing a potential water recycling plant in Porterville. Is that funding, would that be part of that revenue stream for a project like that? And for some of these other areas that Chairman Salas stated, is that something that's being looked into as a funding formula to get water recycling to these areas that we potentially see as being threatened in the future?
So I think first to the question on the recycled program, that's something that the feasibility study that we're going to put together will look at. What's that project look like? My understanding is the City of Porterville wants to look at not only the system for East Porterville, but also what this recycled water project would look at. So I think we'll have a better sense of that once the feasibility study is able to be funded and implemented. And then theoretically, some of these programs that we've got at Department of Water Resources or the Water Board may be able to support funding those in the long run, or at the very least, the feasibility study will give us an idea of what that gap is that we may need to address with other programs.
Yeah, we're finding, and to add to this, we're finding that for every long-term solution project, it requires different type of funding pots, from different state agencies. And that's how we work with those state agencies to ensure that these type of projects have been funded. Could be from different state agencies or could be from federal agencies and local also funding. Mm-hmm. To answer your question about the private nonprofit programs, we found that the private nonprofit programs very helpful in support of long-term solution, drought, emergency situations. Private nonprofits, they have a lot of experience dealing with communities. And this is a program that was passed in 2010, I believe, that provides 100% funding to eligible private nonprofit organizations that are tasked by a local government, could be city or county. They work directly with the local government in accomplishing the task they're assigned to do. So it's an excellent program, and we support it 100%.
Okay. No, thank you for that. As our second panel gets ready to come up, let me ask you, you had mentioned this a little bit earlier, how some counties are a little more prepared. But is there anything from the locals that would help you guys do your job a little bit more, since they're coming up next?
No, I mean, we've been although we've got some counties that have not, made a policy decision to implement programs at a staff level, their department directors in environmental health and emergency services have been actively engaged in learning more about our program, how it works, how they can implement it, so that they can seek the approval and endorsement of their leadership. So, it's a process, and in some cases, you've got counties where the numbers just aren't there. You've got a very small number of wells, and their initial research is indicating that those individuals are able to address their needs. So they've made a policy decision that they don't need to implement a program at this point. And frankly, that's what we don't want this to necessarily be an automatic program. Counties need to have skin in the game. They need to be focused on expending their resources as well, and it's not an automatic come to us for us to support the programs. And so they're trying to strike that balance as well. But we've got, as Charles indicated earlier, probably 2/3 of the state counties have active drought task force committees that meet on a regular basis to bring together department heads and community leaders to look at what the situations are, to look at situations as you spoke of, where we've got communities that may be running out of water, and our involvement and the Water Board and DWR have field staff that attend those local drought task force meetings so that we can continue with the community partners to track those issues and be able to provide whatever advanced planning we can.
Yeah, no, thank you. Please stick around because I'm going to ask the second panel what they would like to see from you guys as well. So thank you. Unless there's a final question or comment from the panelists. Mr. Mathis.
Just real quick, I know we're already working together quite well, and I just look forward to maintaining the communication moving forward. I know the summit we did was very beneficial, and just I think communication is key when it comes to this. And moving forward, again, we've got the locals coming up. In planning for, as the epidemic of the drought spreads, what can these communities do? That way they can get ahead of the game. And I know Tulare County's kind of been the guinea pig. And I just want to make sure as this spreads over the next 10 years, these other guys are able to get ahead of the game. That way this doesn't happen in other communities.
Absolutely.
So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. With that, let's go ahead and bring up the second panel, Drought Emergency Services, a local perspective. We have Denise England, Water Resources Program Manager with Tulare County, Jeff Tabor, Deputy Director, Kings County Division of Environmental Health Services, Paul Boyer, Director of Community Development with Self-Help Enterprises, Ryan Jensen, Community Organizer with Community Water Center in Visalia, and Eric Osterling, Program Manager with Kings Basin Water Authority. Thank you all for joining us this morning. If you'd like to, I believe everyone has an opening statement. If you'd like to begin.
I guess I'll start. Denise England with Tulare County. Tulare County has been the epicenter. We currently have 1,400 confirmed private well failures. 1,200 of those are active, meaning they have not been resolved with a new well or a connection to a water system. So they're either receiving a tank or they're still without water. Until recently, those private well failures have been very difficult to address because they don't fit into any standard traditional funding mechanism that's available for community systems. We've been working very closely with Cal OES, as Eric talked a little about, in building up this individual household tank program, and working with our private nonprofits, including Self-Help Enterprises, CSET, which is our local conservation corps, and United Way, to place tanks, install them, and then provide hauled water to those tanks. We've had some road bumps, some speed bumps along the way with finding source water, getting sufficient tanks available from suppliers, because we're not the only ones in a drought, and the tanks are in heavy demand. As the drought has progressed, it's fear in the region of providing water and folks seeing their water come out of this water system and going somewhere else within the region. There's a fear among, not necessarily amongst city council people or among local water board members, but definitely from the perspective of water users. We've had some incidences in a community that were receiving water for East Porterville. Folks have blockaded our access point. They've broke windows out of our water haulers, and so we're actually having to send a sheriff's deputy to go when they fill their tanks to fill the other tanks in the communities. We've had a really great response from state departments. Through the help of Cal OES facilitating some initial meetings, we've received $1.2 million from Department of Water Resources for a new well to benefit East Porterville. This week we also received a $500,000 commitment at a state board to bridge part of the funding gap. The total projected cost is $2.5 million, so we got $1.2 out of DWR, we got $500,000 out of state board, and USDA currently has an application for another $500,000 that they're looking to fund. So that brings us to a total $2.2 million. We're somewhat confident we can get the project done for that because there are contingencies in that 2.5. But if we do need additional funding, DWR and the others have said that they can probably find some more money for us. So similar situation for Munson. I got a $500,000 commitment yesterday from DWR for that project. Have a $500,000 commitment pending from State Board and an application into USDA for a $1.5 million project.
Got it.
For that.
These are all for long-term solutions.
They're for longer-term solutions. But we are using the short-term emergency as a catalyst, and also, so for East Porterville, there's a need for additional supply water. So the well that we're drilling for there will initially supply water to fill tanks. Same thing for Munson. A well will initially supply water for tanks, and then a longer-term solution can be built off of that supply well. We've also received from Department of Water Resources a water shortage contingency plan. We should receive a draft of that plan sometime next week, and that's urban water suppliers have these plans. They don't really fit into private domestic well failures, so that plan will look at how you can look at the information you have available and sort of try to predict. So when you talk about for other areas in the next 1 to 2 years that may go dry as well, using our plan as a template for the rest of the state to start to inform other areas of what you need to be looking at to determine whether or not you're going to have private well failures. Should the drought continue for several more years in Tulare County, we will continue to explore longer-term solutions. We'll continue to use the short-term need as stepping stones to the long-term needed solutions.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and move on.
Okay, should we go on the order of the agenda or as we are on the table?
We can go the way we are on the table is fine, and then we'll go ahead and open it up to the dais.
Okay, thank you, Assemblyman. My name's Paul Boyer. I work at nonprofit Self-Help Enterprises. We've been around for 50 years. We're primarily an affordable housing organization. In our community development department, we work with small, poor communities of water and wastewater issues. And normally we're dealing with issues like arsenic, nitrate, uranium, and infrastructure needs. Added to that are the drought issues, and so I have information here which I won't go through all the details, so it's more backup, but we're involved on several fronts to try to help families that are impacted by the drought. We have a relatively small loan program. When I say that small, it's between $500,000 and $1 million. It's revolving the fund that we've received from USDA primarily, where we make loans to families to drill deeper wells if that's their only options. And there's a lot of people where they're not close to a system where that is their only option. Unfortunately, we have about 185 families still on our waiting list. We've approached banks and other sources to find additional funds. One of the catch-22s is that a bank will not make an equity loan, at least not the banks we've talked to, if the property is out of water. Yet they need a loan to get that water, and so that's the reason why AB 954 is so important, that if those funds could come through to help with those loans. Also, we noticed that it's available to local agencies in case the state would want to contract with nonprofits. We would be a willing contractor of the state if the state wished us to be so. And also, if there is some way that possibly the state could look at having some sort of insurance on loans with banks, maybe some banks would make loans on these properties because it's kind of like a construction loan. Once you have the well put in, the problem is solved, and now you have water on the property. A big part of what our job is we work with communities that have water supply problems, and listed two that we're working with on a Grapevine, Lake of the Woods Mutual Water Company, which has lost 70% of its capacity, and Fraser Park Public Utility District that's lost 30%. And we're involved in helping those local boards apply for state funds through the state board and also through USDA to help bring additional water in to help them in the long term. We also are involved in a number of communities that have private wells that are going dry that are nearby existing water systems. And we list several of them here. And I'd just like to highlight one of them that we look at as a success story, which is Cameron Creek Colony adjacent to the city of Farmersville. There, the cost of a project to serve 105 homes is $1 million. Last year, applications went in June, $500,000 to USDA, $500,000 to the State Board for Emergency Drought Funds, and each came up with a $500,000 grant to the city of Farmersville to serve those this outlying area. That project is now built because of expedited process, because of emergency funding. There was a simplified preliminary engineering outline process that could be done quickly. On the state side, it was exempt for CEQA. On the federal side, the NEPA was expedited. Basically got NEPA approval in less than a month. There's also a expedited procurement process where, even though bids weren't required, the city of Farmersville, with a short list of preferred contractors, did like a 3-week bid process, got bids from a union contractor that built it under budget, and that project, for an application went in last June. That project was done in April, and now out of the 100 houses or so, roughly 70 are hooked up. And so it's just something I think we learned from, if that's something that possibly the state could look at for not just additional drought programs, but also drought projects. But we work a lot of these communities, like I was saying earlier.
That sounds like you hit the trifecta. You got under budget, efficient, and expedited.
Yes.
I think it was 6 months. I talked to Mayor Gomez of Farmersville, and he goes, "Can't believe it took 6 months." And I told him that it's actually pretty quick.
Yeah, so if that process could be looked at for disadvantaged communities that have primary drinking water quality standards that are not met, that could do a lot of good statewide. Okay, getting back to the drought, working with the community of Okieville, which is the community members have not said they want a different name, so that's why it's called that. But it's about 5 miles west of Tulare, really too far away to tie on to another system. You know, they're looking at forming a mutual water company. We're looking at, with state funds, helping them meet the technical, manageable, financial requirements to operate a water system. And the county is looking at applying for USDA funds to get the process started for a well. And that's an example of, again, things coming together quickly, hoping that state drought funds would be available to help also with that, which could be an issue because so far drought funds have only been available if there's an existing system. This would be a new system. So if that's something that could be considered, this could help other drought-impacted communities. And then lastly, you know, we've been involved very heavily working as a partner with Cal OES, Tulare County OES, and also other county Office of Emergency Services in the Valley in helping get out these tank systems, which are very important. You know, bottled water is very important, especially. But I got to say, what people really have a hard time is meeting the need for sanitation, which you're talking barrels and buckets of water, not just bottles. And it's been very helpful to keep people in their homes and have some sort of normality for those families. We also have been involved with distributing water conservation kits. The governor's office, Plan and Research, partnered with Home Depot, and we worked with them, and we helped get out over 10,000 kits to 43 water systems that they've distributed to families in a 7-county area. So we've been trying a lot of different fronts to help meet these needs. I got to say we've been swamped, and we actually are hiring some more people that's helping out, and we appreciate all the help that the state has had on these programs.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul.
So, good morning, Assembly members. My name is Ryan Jensen. I'm a community organizer with Community Water Center in Visalia, California. And for those who don't know us, we're an environmental justice nonprofit whose mission is to act as a catalyst for community-driven water solutions through organizing, education, and advocacy in the San Joaquin Valley. Community Water Center has been working since 2006 to help disadvantaged communities which struggle to meet drinking water needs, their needs for reliable and affordable and safe drinking water. This problem has, however, been only exacerbated by the ongoing drought, which is disproportionately impacting these most vulnerable communities. So we are in uncharted territory, as multiple people have already commented. Typical disaster response protocols are not designed to deal with this type of a prolonged emergency, but we are learning as we go. The state has done an increasingly good job with making funding available and demonstrating flexibility and creativity to meet communities' needs. In the same way, Tulare County has shown great leadership as the epicenter of the drought, as many people have said, in coordinating with local nonprofits to assist their drought-impacted residents. However, there is still room for improvement. To meet community needs to improve the drought response, we need to take action to advance solutions on 3 fronts. The first is interim emergency solutions, the second are long-term solutions, and then the third is proactive source water protection. So on that first front, the interim solutions are the emergency measures which provide immediate assistance. For thousands of people in Tulare County and elsewhere, these interim responses have been very effective. And Tulare County has been a leader in accessing state funds to provide relief for drought-impacted residents. But relief is still coming very slow for many households, and there are still lots of people falling through the cracks while others are waiting months for assistance. The state and county need to address several important shortcomings to meet residents' immediate needs. First, the counties and the state need to better track and share data on drought impacts. Second, existing programs need to be more accessible and more immediately responsive to all residents in need. And third, program coordinators need to ensure that information is reaching the ground level and improve coordination and communication with residents to advance community-driven solutions. So Tulare County has done an impressive job tracking and reporting well failures, but few other counties have stepped up to this task as effectively as Tulare County has. In addition to collecting better data, though, on the number of people impacted statewide, the counties and states should also be proactively identifying the vulnerable communities that are in imminent danger of losing the human right to water during this ongoing drought, and then proactively acting to respond to those imminent threats. For residents who have reported well failures, emergency solutions from the existing programs are still sometimes slow to arrive, and in some cases not available at all. Regardless of whether a property is a rental or an owner-occupied property, the process has at times the permitting process has at times greatly delayed solutions. Homeowners have reported waiting for months to get through the process of ownership verification, site assessment, permitting, obtaining a tank, and then scheduling before a tank is installed. I know a lot of work is being done to address these challenges, but they are still ongoing challenges. All the while, they're relying on basically daily trips to fill up interim, basically big jugs of water to meet their daily needs. Tenants of rental properties, on the other hand, face nearly insurmountable obstacles in accessing a tank to meet their basic daily needs. And even when landlords do want to buy tanks themselves, it's not yet clear if assistance for water deliveries is available to them due to concerns over gifts of public funds. I know that that's one issue that has come up is landlords who are not willing to help their tenants, but we have also been dealing with some landlords who are going out of their way to try and meet all of the requirements being asked of them. And at least one property in the one property in the community of Munson has several households connected to a single well, which has been dry for 4 months. And this individual has been working diligently with the county to permit and get tanks installed, and it's still not clear whether, as a landlord, there's any assistance available to him to help with water deliveries. And then while relocation assistance is an absolute necessity, as also mentioned, this really should be an option of last resort. Relocating families creates new financial and social hardships on those households, and it breaks apart communities which residents consider their homes. It's also important to note that if relocation becomes mandatory, it's going to have a chilling effect on people requesting assistance. People will actually stop highlighting the fact that they are in need. But perhaps the greatest single need is for effective outreach and collaboration at the ground level to ensure that information and assistance is reaching those who need it the most. Mm-hmm. Local water boards, community-based organizations, and community residents have expressed confusion and lack of clarity about the available assistance and who is eligible or responsible to apply for aid. For example, last year several communities were receiving bottled water from the Tulare County Bottled Water Assistance Program. These were communities that had public water systems like Ducor and Poplar. But after a month or two, they had these deliveries of bottled water abruptly ended, and there was a great deal of confusion about whether their local water board or the county was responsible to provide that assistance. And the follow-up outreach was not made to those water boards to let them know that it was their responsibility. And some systems still report ongoing difficulties obtaining the needed assistance and guidance through the County United Way 211 system. The second front, which is arguably more important than the emergency response, are the long-term solutions. It's not enough just to fund Band-Aids. We need to ensure that our most vulnerable communities are building resilience so that they don't find themselves in this situation again. It's vital that we continue doing what we have been doing and spend emergency drought funding wisely and in coordination with long-term funding sources like Proposition 1 to get permanent water solutions to our smallest and most vulnerable communities. This can be accomplished by helping rural water systems and private well owners connect or consolidate with larger regional public water systems. These larger systems are more efficient and can be operated sustainably to provide affordable and safe water in the foreseeable future, and including through droughts. We have seen many success stories on this front, as highlighted by Paul and Denise. Just to name a few, there's the Cal Water Visalia system has connected to a number of outlying areas. There's Cameron Creek Colony connecting to Farmersville. But and then there's this innovative solution being looked at for Munson, which is going to build on an interim solution, which will then form part of a permanent solution. But in other communities, such long-term solutions are stalled. Outside of Poplar, there's a number of people with private wells that have gone dry, and in other communities face the same challenge, where even if they had the capacity or they lack the water capacity to serve additional residents, and even if they were inclined to do so. East Porterville, on the other hand, remains in triage mode with no apparent path to a long-term solution. Such a solution may be very complicated because one of the concerns is that it's a rural community, people there own livestock, for example, and may not actually want to be annexed by a municipal city. But we need to start these conversations with residents so that they can begin to evaluate the available options to them. These long-term solutions are vital to ensuring community resilience to future droughts. And then the third and final front of needed actions involves doing more to proactively preserve and protect the drinking water that we do have. The status quo is essentially a race to the bottom as irrigators and households alike are scrambling to access increasingly overdrafted aquifers. And the well drilling frenzy is producing more gravel-packed irrigation wells, which potentially serve as a conduit for contamination from upper aquifers to penetrate deeper into the lower aquifers. The new laws coming onto the books, like the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act and the Irrigated Lands Program, are great starting points, but they are going to be solutions that are slow in coming. And more needs to be done at all levels in the shorter term. We need to accelerate efforts by both farmers and the state to reduce fertilizer runoff, and we need to more closely scrutinize permits for new wells and water transfers. to assess potential impacts to drinking water supplies. As one example, an irrigation well was drilled just last month, approximately 100 yards from the sole public supply well for the community of Sultana. And the water supply for the city of Woodlake is similarly in jeopardy as a result of a private water transfer going on in their vicinity. As the drought goes on, such competition for increasingly valuable access to water sources and has the potential to further put vulnerable communities at risk of losing their water supplies. So, in closing, I do want to say that this unprecedented drought does pose serious challenges, but it's also an opportunity. These problems can be solved if we accelerate the assistance to those who are already impacted and use the attention on the drought to develop the permanent solutions our communities need to ensure lasting access to safe and affordable drinking water. Regardless of whether this current drought lasts another 6 months or 6 years, there's one lesson we can learn from the history of California. This is not our first drought, and it will not be our last. So the actions we take today need to build more resilient, sustainable solutions so that we don't find ourselves in this situation again.